Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Emma.
Welcome to Real Talk Society, where psychology meets career, communication, and the realities of modern professional life.
Alex, I want to start with something that happened to me a few years ago. And I think a lot of people listening are going to feel this in their chest.
Go ahead.
I was in a meeting. I pitched an idea, a real one. I had thought about it. I had the data. I had the reasoning. And the room went quiet. Nobody said anything. The conversation moved on. 3 weeks later, someone else, someone more senior, said almost the exact same thing. And people loved it. The VP said, "That's exactly what we need."
And your idea got credited to that person.
Completely. And the worst part? I don't think that person even knew they had heard my idea somewhere before. It just disappeared into the room and came back wearing a different face.
That is one of the most frustrating experiences in a professional career, and it happens constantly, more than people admit.
Much more.
And here's what makes it so damaging. It's not just about credit, it's about how invisible it makes you feel, like your thinking doesn't register.
Exactly. And if that keeps happening, you start questioning whether your ideas are actually good. You start holding back. That's where the real damage begins.
So let's actually look at why this happens, because I think people jump to the wrong conclusion. They think, my idea got stolen, or nobody respects me. And sometimes that's true. But most of the time, the problem is earlier than that.
The problem is before the idea even lands.
Right. It's a framing problem, a timing problem, a communication problem, not an idea problem.
And that distinction is everything. Because if you think the problem is the quality of your ideas, you go quiet. You wait until your idea is perfect before you say it, which means you never say it.
Or you say it in a way that doesn't stick.
Exactly. You say it quietly, almost apologetically. You bury it in the middle of a long explanation. And by the time you finish, people have already moved on mentally.
I've done this. I've been in rooms where I had something real to say, and I opened with, "I don't know if this makes sense, but," which is basically telling the room to ignore you before you've even started.
That's a very common pattern. You hedge. You soften. You protect yourself from judgment before you've even been judged. And in doing that, you make your idea smaller than it actually is.
And smaller ideas don't get remembered.
Let's stay here for a second, because I think this is important. Why do we do that? Why do we shrink before we speak?
Fear. Pretty simple. Fear of being wrong in public. Fear of looking like you don't understand the room. Fear of your idea being rejected, and that rejection meaning something about you as a person.
And in corporate environments, that fear gets amplified. Because there are hierarchies. There are people whose opinion of you affects your career. So the stakes feel real.
They are real. That's not just anxiety. That's a rational reading of the environment. If you pitch something badly in front of the wrong person, it can affect how you're perceived for months.
Which is why people either go quiet or they overcompensate. They try to explain too much. They pre-answer every possible objection before anyone has even raised one.
And that kills the idea too, because by the time you've finished defending a point no one attacked, the idea is exhausted. People are just waiting for you to stop.
There's also something else happening. Overthinking. You've had the idea, you've lived with it, you understand all its complexity. So when you present it, you present all of that complexity. But the room hasn't lived with it. They're hearing it for the first time.
So you're speaking from depth, and they're processing from zero.
And there's a massive gap there. The idea gets lost in that gap.
So here's the shift that changes everything. And it's not about being more confident or louder or more aggressive in meetings. It's about understanding that an idea and the communication of an idea are two completely different things.
They really are. You can have a brilliant idea and communicate it poorly. You can have a mediocre idea and communicate it in a way that makes people feel like they need it.
Which is uncomfortable to say, but it's true.
It's true. And the best communicators in any organization understand this. They don't just have ideas, they package them.
What does that mean, practically?
It means you lead with the outcome, not the process. You don't explain how you got to the idea. You say what the idea does, what problem it solves, what it changes, in 1 or 2 sentences, max.
And then you stop.
And then you stop. You let it land. You don't fill the silence with more explanation.
That silence is actually working in your favor. If you keep talking, you rescue people from having to engage with the idea. You give them something else to listen to instead of something to think about.
Right. The silence creates space for the idea to exist.
There's also a timing dimension here that I think people underestimate. The same idea, said at the wrong moment, dies. Said at the right moment, it becomes a conversation.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If you bring up a structural problem during a moment of acute crisis, people don't have the bandwidth. They're in survival mode. Your idea about long-term improvement sounds tone-deaf, even if it's completely right.
But if you bring it up when the crisis is past and people are in a reflective mode, when someone asks, "How do we make sure this doesn't happen again?" the same idea is exactly what the room needed.
Same idea, different moment, completely different reception.
And this is something you can actually learn to read. When is the room open? When is it closed? When is someone in a decision-making mindset versus a defensive one?
That's not manipulation, that's intelligence. It's reading the environment and responding to it, which is what good communicators do.
I also want to talk about something that feels uncomfortable but needs to be said. Visibility.
Go ahead.
In a lot of professional cultures, especially in more introverted or technical fields, there's this belief that good work speaks for itself, that if you do something well, people will notice.
And that belief costs people entire careers.
Entire careers. Because organizations are not built to automatically notice. They're built to respond to what gets surfaced. And if you're not surfacing your work, your thinking, your contributions, someone else will surface theirs. And they'll get the credit.
Not because they're dishonest, just because they're visible.
Visibility isn't bragging. It's making sure your thinking is part of the conversation. It's following up after a meeting with a short message that says, "I want to build on what we discussed. Here's where I'd take it." It's making your ideas traceable.
Traceable. That's a good word for it.
If people can trace an idea back to you, if there's a message, a document, a moment in a meeting where you clearly articulated something, then it becomes very hard for that contribution to disappear.
And it also changes how you're perceived over time, because you start being seen as someone who thinks ahead, someone who brings direction, not just tasks.
And that's the kind of person who gets listened to when they speak.
I want to close with something simple. If you've felt invisible, if you've had the experience Emma described at the beginning, where your idea came back wearing someone else's name, it's worth asking a hard question.
Not, "Why don't people listen to me?"
But, how am I presenting what I know?
Because the problem is rarely the idea. The problem is usually the packaging, the framing, the moment, the follow-through.
And those things can be changed, not overnight, but deliberately.
You don't need to become a different person. You need to become more intentional about how you communicate what you already think.
That's it for today's episode of Real Talk Society.
If this conversation connected with something you've experienced, share it with someone who needs to hear it.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.